When searchers finally found the first sign of Michael Graham, it wasn't him. It was a message. Scrawled in the dirt near a remote cattle water trough, it read, "Walking very weak." Days later, another word appeared: help. The messages confirmed what searchers had hoped. Michael had survived long enough to leave them. But despite one of the largest land search operations Western Australia had ever undertaken, the man who wrote those words has never been found. This is Vanished West, a podcast exploring the stories of people who disappeared across Western Australia. Each episode examines the lives they left behind, the investigations that followed, and the questions that remain unanswered. If you're enjoying Vanished West, I'd love for you to follow the podcast. It helps more people discover these stories and ensures that you never miss a future episode. Vanished West is independently researched and produced by me. If you'd like to help keep the podcast going, you can also support the show through Buy Me a Coffee. The link is in the episode description. In the summer of 2013, 46-year-old Michael Keith Graham travelled from his home in Acadia Vale, New South Wales, to the remote Goldfields of Western Australia. It was a journey of more than 3,000 kilometres, taking him from the east coast to a landscape defined by vast distances, abandoned mine workings, and some of the most isolated country in the state. Michael was married and the father of 2 children. Over the years, he had worked in hospitality, building and landscaping, and at the time of his disappearance, he was breeding reptiles on a semi-commercial basis. Like many people drawn to the Goldfields each year, he also enjoyed prospecting. Michael had also lived with significant health challenges. 2 serious motor vehicle crashes, one in 1992 and another in 1998, had left Michael with ongoing health problems. He had undergone 2 knee replacements, had 1 kidney removed, and lived with chronic back pain, managing it with prescribed medication. Despite those injuries, Michael had made the long journey to Western Australia with plans already in place, suggesting his health hadn't stopped him from pursuing the things he enjoyed. Michael arrived in Menzies on the 2nd of January 2013. Rather than heading straight into the bush, he checked into the historic Menzies Hotel. The publican David McKenna had arranged for Michael to help manage the hotel while he planned to take leave from the area. It was an opportunity to spend time in the Goldfields while also lending a hand. There was nothing to suggest those plans would change. Over the next week, Michael settled into life in the small outback town before making arrangements to head north with local prospector Peter Holloway. On Friday, the 11th of January, the 2 men packed their gear and left Menzies behind. Neither of them could have known it would be the last time anyone would see Michael Graham alive. The drive from Menzies to Riverina Station took the men deep into Western Australia's goldfields. Their destination was Peter Holloway's prospecting lease on Riverina Station, a pastoral lease covering almost 500,000 acres of remote country. Reaching it meant travelling for around an hour along unsealed roads before finally arriving at the campsite during the afternoon of Friday the 11th of January 2013. The first full day at camp didn't unfold as planned. Heavy rain fell throughout the following day, forcing Michael and Peter to put prospecting aside while they worked to keep their camp dry. Michael planned to sleep in his Nissan X-Trail while the pair spent much of the day making sure the campsite could withstand a downpour. The following day, the weather cleared. The 2 men finally had the opportunity to explore the surrounding country together. They spent time panning for gold and examining the rocks around the lease. At some point during the day, Michael also began searching for a particular flower. According to the evidence heard at the inquest, he believed it might contain properties that could prevent a medical condition he feared could become cancerous. As evening approached, they returned to the camp. Sometime between 9 and 10 o'clock that night, Michael retired to his vehicle. As the day drew to a close, there was nothing to suggest anything was about to go wrong. When Peter settled in for the night, there was every reason to expect the following morning would be much like the last one before. Instead, it would be the last night anyone could say with certainty where Michael Graham had been. Peter Holloway woke at around 9 o'clock in the morning of January the 14th, 2013. Michael wasn't at the campsite. At first, there was no reason to be alarmed. The previous day, the men had spent hours exploring the surrounding country, and prospectors often worked independently, so Peter assumed Michael had simply risen early and headed out before him. He made himself a cup of coffee before setting off to continue his own prospecting. When he returned to camp shortly after midday, Michael still hadn't returned. Peter called out for him, then repeatedly sounded the horn of his vehicle, hoping Michael would hear it somewhere beyond the camp. Nothing. Receiving no response, he left camp and searched the immediate area to the south before eventually returning that afternoon. Again, there was no sign of Michael. As daylight began to fade, concern replaced the confidence that Michael would simply wander back into camp. Peter contacted a friend in Menzies and explained that Michael was missing, believing the information would be passed on to police. Before darkness fell, he hung a light in a nearby tree. If Michael had become disoriented after sunset, perhaps the light would guide him home. It didn't. When morning arrived on Tuesday, Peter resumed searching, driving through the surrounding country in the hope of finding some trace of his friend. By lunchtime, there was still nothing. That friend Peter had contacted the previous evening, together with Menzies Hotel publican David McKenna, drove out to Riverina Station. At about 12:50 p.m. on the 15th of January, while travelling to the campsite, McKenna contacted Leonora Police Station to report Michael missing. By the time they reached the camp that afternoon, everyone was asking the same question: where was Michael? The disappearance was treated seriously from the outset. After receiving the report, Leonora Police immediately began making inquiries. The caretaker from nearby Mount Ida was asked to assist while officers gathered information about Michael's movements and the area surrounding Peter Holloway's camp. As the afternoon progressed and there was still no sign of Michael, the response was escalated. The Goldfields Esperance District Office, the WA Police Emergency Operations Unit, nearby mining operations and the Shire of Menzies were all notified. Before long, the search extended well beyond the campsite. Police officers, state emergency service volunteers, station staff, and local community members joined the effort. Ground teams searched tracks and surrounding bushland, while aircraft swept across the vast expanse of Riverina Station from above. Every lead, no matter how small, was followed. For days the search continued, yet every day ended the same way. There was no confirmed sightings of Michael. No discarded clothing or equipment, no obvious trail leading rescuers toward him. The further the search expanded, the more apparent it became just how immense the surrounding landscape really was. By the 22nd of January, after more than a week of searching, police were preparing to reduce the operation. It was a difficult decision, but one faced in many large-scale searches when every available lead has been exhausted. Then, just as that decision was about to be made, everything changed. The owner of Riverina Station discovered what appeared to be fresh signs of human activity near a cattle water trough known as 5 Mile Well. For the first time since Michael disappeared, investigators had something tangible to follow. It was the first meaningful lead investigators had uncovered in days. The search was immediately redirected to the area. The discovery at 5 Mile Well transformed the search. Until that point, investigators had been looking for a man who had vanished without a trace. Now they had reason to believe Michael had survived long enough to leave evidence of his movements. Search teams were immediately redirected to that area. Special Tactical Response Group tracking officers were flown to Riverina Station, joining police, ground crews and aircraft already searching the surrounding country. Every track, every footprint and every mark in the dirt suddenly carried new significance. Searchers soon discovered why the owner had believed someone had recently passed through the area. Approximately 1 kilometre from 5 Mile Well, searchers found words scratched into the ground. Walking very weak. An arrow had been drawn beside the message pointing back towards the water trough. It was the first clear indication that Michael had been alive after leaving the campsite. The search intensified once again. Police prepared survival packs containing food, bottled water, multivitamins, and matches. Each pack also included a written message asking Michael to remain where he was if he found it, and to light a fire so search aircraft could locate him. The packs were carefully placed along tracks, fence lines, wells, and bores throughout the search area. Places investigators believed he might pass if he was still trying to make his way to safety. Less than 24 hours later, another message was discovered. While flying over the area near Currajong Well, around 7.5 kilometers east of the campsite, a helicopter crew spotted another message. It consisted of just one word: help. Search teams immediately converged on that location. Investigators believe the writing had been there for at least 24 hours, suggesting Michael had moved through the area before rescuers arrived. That afternoon, a thunderstorm swept across Riverina Station. The rain forced search operations to stop temporarily and washed away many of the signs trackers had been following. At the same time, the coroner later observed that the storm may also have given Michael access to fresh water, if he was still alive to reach it. When the search resumed the following morning, it did so with every resource police could reasonably deploy: helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, ground search teams, specialist tactical response group trackers, police trail bikes. Even forward-looking infrared technology was used in an effort to detect heat sources across the surrounding country. When the search finally ended, the messages remained the last confirmed signs Michael Graham had been alive. No further messages were ever found. No fresh tracks appeared, and no one saw Michael. The searchers had followed every single clue he left behind, but somehow they never caught up with him. By January 29th, the search had reached a turning point. Despite the extraordinary effort, no further evidence of Michael's movements had ever been found. The search operation was formally scaled back, although police weren't yet prepared to abandon hope entirely. The survival packs remained where they'd been left. For almost another 2 weeks, they were checked regularly, each inspection carrying the same hope: that one of them might have been opened or that fresh tracks might appear nearby. Neither ever happened. On the 11th of February 2013, the packs were collected. The active search had come to an end. Even then, the investigation continued on. Police examined Michael's mobile phone, his bank accounts, and the campsite itself, looking for anything that might explain why he had disappeared. There was no evidence he had planned to leave voluntarily, no indication he had arranged to meet anyone, no activity suggesting he had attempted to begin a new life elsewhere. Investigators found nothing to support the idea that Michael had deliberately vanished. As investigators worked through everything they knew, several details became increasingly significant. When Michael left the campsite on the morning of the 14th of January, he left behind both his GPS and his mobile phone. To the coroner, that suggested he never intended to travel far from camp. The coroner considered this significant because it suggested Michael had not expected to be away from camp for long. Investigators also examined Michael's health. Years before travelling to Western Australia, he had survived 2 serious motor vehicle crashes. He lived with chronic back pain, had undergone 2 knee replacements, and had 1 kidney removed. The coroner accepted that these conditions may have reduced his mobility if he became injured or found himself trying to cross difficult country. There was another piece of evidence investigators couldn't ignore: the messages left behind by Michael. To his wife, they suggested something profoundly simple. She told the inquest she believed her husband had been trying to lead rescuers to him. He wasn't trying to disappear. He was trying to be found. In December 2013, Acting State Coroner Evelyn Vicker delivered her findings. She concluded that Michael Graham had died somewhere in the area surrounding 5 Mile Well between the 15th of January and the 11th of February 2013. The evidence established that he had died, but it could not establish precisely how. The coroner considered that Michael may have become injured, weakened by a lack of food and water, and increasingly disoriented. His decision not to remain near a reliable water source suggested he may no longer have been thinking clearly. But without finding Michael himself, those conclusions could never be more than the most likely explanation based on the available evidence. More than a decade later, that remains the position today. No one knows exactly what happened after Michael walked away from the campsite on the morning of the 14th of January 2013, and no one knows where he came to rest. Although the official search came to an end in February, Michael Graham's disappearance was far from forgotten. In the years that followed, his case remained listed by both Crime Stoppers Western Australia and the Australian Missing Persons Register, keeping his photograph and details in the public eye in the hope that someone, somewhere, might hold the missing piece of the puzzle. For Michael's family, however, the passing years brought little comfort. On social media, his sister Lisa, who had travelled from New Zealand to help search for him, wrote that she still missed her brother every day and continued to hope for the closure their family had never received. In the same post, she asked people to be careful about making assumptions, reminding readers that many of the circumstances surrounding Michael's disappearance were known only to those closest to him. Other family members and friends shared their own memories. One friend described Michael as a lovely family man. Another simply remembered him as a great guy. His niece wrote that although she had only known him as a baby, she would always carry him in her heart. None of those memories answered the questions left behind, but together they painted a picture of the man his family had lost. Long before Michael became the subject of an inquest, he was simply a husband, a father, a brother, and a friend. His disappearance also became part of a broader conversation about safety in remote Australia. In 2015, the Australian Financial Review examined Michael's case while reporting on calls for greater use of personal locator beacons by prospectors travelling into isolated areas. Unlike a mobile phone, a personal locator beacon communicates by satellite and can alert emergency services even when there is no mobile reception. No one can say whether such a device would have changed the outcome in Michael's case. But his disappearance became one of several tragedies that prompted renewed discussion about how people prepare before venturing into some of Australia's most remote country. Today, more than 12 years after Michael walked away from his campsite, the questions remain exactly as they were in January 2013. Where was he trying to go? What happened after he left those messages? And why, despite an extraordinary search, has no trace of him ever been found? Some disappearances leave investigators with almost nothing to follow. Michael Graham's case was different. Searchers found evidence he'd been alive, they found the direction he'd travelled in, they found messages he'd left behind. They even found places where he'd almost certainly stopped. Yet somehow, despite all of those clues, they never found Michael himself. That is what makes this case so difficult to forget. It reminds us that even the largest searches cannot always overcome the scale of Western Australia's outback. Distances are immense, conditions can change quickly, and once someone becomes separated from the people looking for them, every passing hour makes the task more difficult. Today, many people travelling into a remote country carry personal locator beacons or satellite communication devices. Those advances have undoubtedly improved safety, but they can't change what happened in the past. Michael Graham never returned home. His family are still waiting for the answers that only he could have provided. Perhaps one day, someone travelling through Riverina Station will notice something that searchers missed all those years ago. And until then, Michael's final journey remains unfinished. If you'd like to support Vanished West and help me continue researching and sharing the stories of Western Australia's missing, you can do so through Buy Me a Coffee. You'll find the link in today's episode description. If this episode resonated with you, I'd also really appreciate if you could follow the podcast and leave a rating or review on your favourite podcast platform. It helps more people discover these stories and keeps the memories of those who vanished alive. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and never forget those who vanished from the West.